When you think of Ben Jonson, you probably think of these literary masterpieces, right? Plays like Volpone or The Alchemist. But what about the one play that for centuries has been written off as, well, a clumsy first draft? A little something called A Tale of a Tub. Today, we're going to be detectives. We're going to solve a 400-year-old literary puzzle and find the hidden genius that's been hiding in plain sight.
So here's the big question that flips everything on its head. For hundreds of years, the experts looked at this play and basically said, yeah, this is an awkward amateur effort. But what if they were completely wrong? What if all those so-called flaws were actually intentional, part of a really clever, really sophisticated joke by a master at the very end of his career?
So you've got these two totally opposite identities for the very same play. And look, this isn't just some stuffy academic debate. Figuring out when this play was written completely changes what it means. Was it a failed first try, or was it a final, masterful mic drop?
Okay, so the whole thing really boils down to two different stories. On one side, you have the traditional theory. This play is from around 1596, a piece of juvenilia. Something he wrote when he was young and just starting out. But on the other side, you've got the modern theory. Nope, it's from 1633. It's a sharp, bitter satire written by a literary lion who is ready to settle some old scores. Let's dig into that old theory first.
For a really long time, the most respected Jonson scholars, we're talking heavy hitters like Herford and Simpson, were totally convinced this play was an early work. They looked at the style, the characters, the language, and they just thought, nah, this doesn't feel like the work of the mature, confident Jonson we all know.
And their arguments were pretty solid. They pointed out that the verse style felt more Elizabethan than from the 1630s. The characters seemed kind of flat, a little undeveloped. And the language was so old-fashioned that it would have been tough for an audience in 1633 to even get all the jokes. It smelled like a first attempt. But, turns out, they were missing one single explosive piece of evidence.
And this, my friends, is where our little detective story takes a very sharp turn. See, the key to unlocking this whole mystery wasn't in the verse or the characters. It was buried in a bitter, decades-long feud between Jonson and one of the most famous men in all of England. So, meet Inigo Jones. This guy was the superstar architect and designer of his day, a total rock star. He and Jonson worked together all the time, and to put it mildly, they could not stand each other. Their rivalry was absolutely legendary, and it all came down to one thing: ego. Who was more important?
Their main battleground was something called the court masque. Imagine these incredibly over-the-top, lavish shows put on for the king and queen. Jonson wrote the words, the poetry, but Inigo Jones designed the spectacular sets, the costumes, the wild special effects. Jones was convinced people came for his designs, while Jonson was absolutely furious that his brilliant poetry was getting overshadowed by what he called empty spectacle.
Now, Jonson wasn't the kind of guy to keep his feelings to himself. He took shots at Jones and his plays for years, but the attack in A Tale of a Tub is the one that really matters for us. It has this ridiculous character named In Medley, this bumbling handyman who just meddles in everyone's business, and it's a clear, vicious, and frankly hilarious caricature of Inigo Jones. This wasn't just some random joke, it was the climax of a 20-year grudge.
That slam on Inigo Jones, that is the smoking gun. It dates the play perfectly to 1633, right when their feud was at its absolute boiling point. This wasn't some clumsy early work, oh no. This was a calculated act of literary revenge by an old master. So now that we know when it was written, we can finally figure out what on earth it's actually about. Okay, so with that 1633 date locked in, the play's bizarre, seemingly random plot starts to look, well, very different. What once looked like just bad writing now looks like deliberate, even philosophical chaos.
And the first clue is hiding in plain sight. It's literally the title. Back in Jonson's time, A Tale of a Tub was slang for a cock and bull story, a ridiculous, unbelievable yarn. So Jonson is winking at us from the very beginning. He's telling us, hey, don't expect a neat, tidy plot here. I'm promising you chaos.
And boy, does he deliver. The plot, which happens on Valentine's Day of all days, is just a masterclass in absurdity. It kicks off with a lottery. A young woman named Audrey gets matched with a tile maker named John Clay. Simple enough, right? Wrong. A rival suitor, Squire Tubb, frames Clay for a crime he didn't commit. Then another suitor tries to double-cross the squire. It's just this domino effect of nonsense, until finally, while everyone's busy scheming, a fourth guy just quietly marries her.
So is this just a silly farce? Not at all. Modern critics, now that they're looking at the play as a late work, have found something surprisingly deep going on underneath all that chaos. It's actually a pretty profound look at the roles of chance and fate in our lives.
So what's really going on here? Well, the characters in this play are just constantly getting hit with random, chaotic events. Pure chance. But here's the crazy part. Instead of fighting back or trying to make their own choices, they just passively accept it all. They treat these random events as their unchangeable destiny.
For instance, that Valentine's lottery that pairs Audrey with John Clay, totally random, but her parents act like it's a sacred bond forged by fate itself. The robbery accusation against him is a complete lie, but the local constable just accepts it as the gospel truth. The world of the play is chaotic, but the people living in it are totally passive. They just let chance boss them around as if it were destiny.
There's actually a philosophical term for this, from the thinker Walter Benjamin. He called it the creaturely state. It's a heavy concept, but think of it like this. It's when human life just kind of sinks into mere existence. You stop being the driver in your own life and just become a passenger, being acted upon by all these outside forces. The villagers have completely given up their agency, and they're living in this stale, empty world because they've surrendered to the tyranny of chance. So, how do you escape a world like that? A world where everyone is just passively following a script written by chaos? Well, Jonson's answer is pretty radical. The only way out is to do something totally unexpected, something almost foolish that completely breaks the pattern. And that is exactly what Paul Martin does. His sudden marriage to Audrey isn't just a funny plot twist. It's an act of pure will in a world that's forgotten what that even is.
So, when you put it all together, by simply redating this play, we've completely transformed it. What looked like a failure is actually one of Jonson's most philosophically ambitious and daring comedies. It's his final, brilliant joke on a world that's obsessed with order.
I mean, just think about the transformation here. The old reading gave us a clumsy, silly play with flat characters. But the new reading, the one armed with the truth about the Inigo Jones feud and a deeper look at its themes, gives us a masterpiece. It's a biting satire where the seemingly weak characters are actually trapped by fate, and that silly plot is really a profound exploration of chaos and free will.
And solving this one little literary mystery just opens up a much bigger question, doesn't it? It makes you wonder, how many other so-called failures or minor works are out there, just waiting for one missing clue to unlock their hidden genius? It's a great reminder that sometimes the greatest treasures are the ones we've all been taught to overlook.
Welcome to The Explainer. You know, sometimes you find a story from hundreds of years ago that feels like it could have been written yesterday. Well, today we're diving into a 400-year-old play that is just an absolutely brilliant takedown of get-rich-quick schemes and that relentless pressure to live the perfect life. It all takes place in a booming London where everyone was trying to make it big, and let's just say the results were often disastrous.
And it all kicks off with this single line. This isn't just a casual wish, right? This is a desperate, furious demand. This is the voice of Gertrude, a merchant's daughter, and this one cries what launches this wild, cautionary tale about ambition, deception, and what happens when you care way more about appearances than reality.
So let's set the scene. We're in Jacobean London. The city is just buzzing with new money, new opportunities. The old, super rigid class system, it was starting to show some cracks. For the very first time, people from the merchant class could actually start to dream about becoming nobility. It was a time of incredible possibility, but also, as you can imagine, incredible risk if you tried to make that jump.
And right at the center of all this change is Gertrude. She is not happy with her perfectly comfortable, middle-class life. Oh no. She sees her own father as just some low-capped tradesman, and she is absolutely consumed with this one idea. She has to become a lady, and she'll do whatever it takes.
Gertrude's shame runs so deep, it's almost physical. She is literally ripping off her clothes, her city attire as she calls it, because she cannot stand the thought of her new knightly boyfriend seeing her dressed like a common merchant's daughter. To her, these clothes are a prison, a symbol of the life she is just desperate to leave behind.
But not everyone in her family is so obsessed. This is her sister, Mildred, and she has this beautiful way of putting it. She's saying she'd rather be authentic, true to herself, like a piece of clothing made from a single fabric. She's not about to mix sackcloth with satin just to pretend she's something she isn't. And right there, you've got the play's central conflict, humble contentment versus hollow ambition. And that exact same choice, pride versus humility, is playing out right in the family business through two of their apprentices, a guy named Golding and another named Quicksilver. And these two guys, they have completely different ideas about how you're supposed to get ahead in life. Okay, so on one side, you've got Golding. He's your classic, old school, slow and steady wins the race kind of guy. He believes in honest work, thrift, the whole 9 yards. But then you have Quicksilver. And his name really says it all, doesn't it? He's all about the hustle, the shortcut, the get-rich-quick scheme. He's even willing to literally shave bits of gold off of coins using acid. I mean, he is basically the 17th century version of a crypto scammer, for real.
So who do you think our ambitious Gertrude goes for? Not the steady, reliable Golding, of course. Nope, she marries Sir Petronel Flash, a knight who promises her everything she's ever wanted, a fancy title, a glamorous life, and this magnificent castle out in the country. But, as the title here hints, all those promises are basically built on thin air.
Yep. Sir Petronel is a complete and total fake. He's a knight in name only. He probably just bought the title, and he's completely broke. And that amazing castle he was talking about, it does not exist. He's just as desperate to get rich quick as she is to be a lady, which, makes them a perfectly disastrous match.
So it teams up with that other schemer, Quicksilver, and they hatch this whole elaborate con. Step 1. Sir Petronel uses his fake title to marry Gertrude. Step 2. They convince her to sign over her very real inheritance so they can furnish her very fake castle. And the final step, take the money, fake a voyage to the New World, and disappear for good.
So how do they fund this little getaway? By roping in other greedy suckers with these just unbelievable stories about Virginia. They paint this picture of a magical land where gold is so common people use it for frying pans and, well, chamber pots. It's an absolutely ridiculous fantasy, but it's exactly what people blinded by hype want to hear. Kind of sounds like those promises of a guaranteed 100x return on some new investment, doesn't it? All right, so with Gertrude's money in their pockets and a ship full of hopeful fools, our con men set off for their imaginary paradise. They're celebrating, toasting their own genius, but their big trip to a life of luxury doesn't exactly go as planned. Let's just say reality is about to hit them hard.
And this is where the sheer absurdity of their plan becomes painfully obvious. Their grand voyage to the New World, it barely even makes it out of the city. After a big drunken party, they set sail. A storm immediately blows in, and their ship gets wrecked on the banks of the Thames. So there they are, soaked, broke, and totally humiliated, and they're still in London.
This quote just perfectly captures the absolute rock bottom they've hit. All that pride, all that ambition, all their clever little plans just washed away by the river. They are stripped of everything, left with absolutely nothing but their own shame and the mud on the ground.
And where does all this grand ambition ultimately lead them? Straight to debtor's prison. And in a final, really cruel twist of irony, the social status they were so desperate for now comes down to which prison ward they can afford. Even in total disgrace, that ladder of wealth and status is still there, just in a much, much grimmer form.
And what about Gertrude? Well, her fall from grace is maybe the most pathetic of all. That title she sacrificed everything for, her precious ladyship, is now totally worthless. She's so desperate she actually tries to pawn it for just 40 pounds, just to buy some new clothes. The ultimate symbol of her ambition has become just another thing to sell off.
So after all that chaos, you gotta wonder, right? What about the ones who stayed behind? What happened to Mildred and Golding, the two who chose humility, honesty, and good old-fashioned hard work?
Well, the play really doesn't leave much to the imagination here. The outcomes are crystal clear. Golding, our honest apprentice, he marries the virtuous Mildred, he becomes a wealthy, respected city official. And meanwhile, the ambitious social climbers are left in prison with absolutely nothing.
And what's interesting is the play basically tells us exactly what it's doing. Gertrude's father, Touchstone, he actually frames the whole story as a kind of social experiment. He says he wants to prove which path actually leads to a better life, living humbly within your means or shooting for the stars.
And here it is, the final verdict of that experiment. The play's central message is that ambition based purely on appearances, on the show, is completely hollow. It has no foundation, no substance, and in the end, it just burns itself out, leaving nothing but ash behind. So in the end, this 400-year-old satire leaves us with a question that feels incredibly relevant today.
In a world that so often seems to reward the loudest and the flashiest, it makes you stop and think about the real, and sometimes devastating cost of chasing a life that isn't really your own.
You know, when you think of Shakespeare's London, you probably picture a golden age of creativity, right? The Globe Theatre, incredible poetry, amazing plays. But for the writers themselves, this era was anything but golden. The romantic myth we all know hides a much darker reality, one filled with paranoia, censorship, and very, very real danger. And I'm not speaking metaphorically here. In this world, the words you put on a page could literally lead to public mutilation. It was a pretty brutal reminder that in an age with an absolute monarch, a simple pen could be seen as a weapon. And the state? Well, it was more than willing to disarm you. Permanently. Just look at what happened in 1579. A guy named John Stubbs published a pamphlet. His big crime? Arguing the queen was too old to get married and have kids. For sharing that opinion, he was dragged to a public marketplace and his right hand was chopped off with a butcher's knife. They say it took 3 swings. That one horrifying event sent a message to every single writer in England. So yeah, this was a truly dangerous time to be a writer. To really get it, we have to push past that golden age myth and see what was actually going on. A repressive reality where every word you wrote was being watched, and any criticism, real or even just imagined, could have the absolute worst consequences. I mean, the environment was just hostile. First off, forget about freedom of speech. That concept didn't exist. The powerful knew that words could sway the public, and they were deeply, deeply paranoid about satire. A joke aimed at the wrong person wasn't just going to hurt your career. It could land you in a disgusting, disease-ridden prison with all your work confiscated and literally burned. This whole dangerous world is perfectly captured in the lives of 2 of the era's most brilliant and, not surprisingly, most controversial figures, Ben Jonson and Thomas Nashe. Their stories, they really show you what a high-wire act it was to be a writer in Shakespeare's London. So on one side, you have Ben Jonson, super educated, steeped in the classics, but with a personality that seemed to actively look for fights. On the other side, there's Thomas Nashe, this wild prose innovator whose writing was just a whirlwind of new words and crazy energy. Both were absolute geniuses, and both were on a total collision course with the authorities. A contemporary of Jonson's described him perfectly, someone who loved praising himself and scorning pretty much everyone else. Yeah, this was not a guy who was going to quietly follow the rules. He was proud, he was confrontational, and his plays definitely showed it. Nashe, meanwhile, was just obsessed with being original. He believed a writer had to constantly invent something new, to cry something new, as he put it, or you'd just be dismissed as an idiot. His style was energetic, it was spontaneous, and it was completely unapologetic. And that kind of style was bound to get him noticed, for better or for worse. So, what happens when these 2 provocative talents decide to team up? Well, you get a scandal that doesn't just make waves, it rocks the entire city. The play was called The Isle of Dogs, and it became the most notorious theatrical disaster of the entire 1590s. This is the question that must have hung over every single playwright. And Jonson and Nashe, they were about to find out the answer in the most brutal way you can imagine. Their little collaboration would trigger a response from the highest levels of government that would change their lives and the whole literary scene forever. The fallout was immediate, and it was severe. The play got labeled lewd and mutinous. The Queen's own top interrogator issued arrest warrants. Ben Jonson was thrown into the infamous Marshalsea prison. Thomas Nashe, hearing the news, didn't wait around. He fled London for his life. His house was raided, and he became a fugitive from the law. I mean, think about that for a second. The authorities didn't just ban the play, they hunted down and destroyed every single copy. Its content was seen as so seditious, so dangerous to the state, that they literally erased it from history. To this day, we have no idea what was in it, only that the government considered it a direct threat. But the Isle of Dogs affair wasn't just some isolated incident. It was the catalyst. The state used the scandal as the perfect justification to tighten its grip on all writers, especially the ones who were good at satire. 2 years later, in 1599, the authorities made their biggest move yet. This year would go down as one of the most sweeping acts of censorship in English history. It was called the Bishop's Ban. The two highest religious authorities in the country, who also happened to be the state's main censors, issued a decree. They put together a list of books to be rounded up and publicly burned. And they specifically went after satires and plays. The message was crystal clear. We are watching, and we will silence you. And the ban got incredibly personal. For Thomas Nashe, this was basically a career death sentence. It straight up forbade the printing of anything he had ever written, or would ever write in the future. His entire body of work was officially outlawed. So what became of our two writers? Their paths ended up going in completely different directions, and it reveals everything about the risks of this age. And surprisingly, the survival strategies they had to think about have echoed down through history, even into the 20th century. I mean, their fates could not have been more different. Ben Jonson, ever the fighter, made it through prison, not just once, but multiple times. He somehow navigated those treacherous political waters and eventually became so established that he was named England's first official poet laureate. Thomas Nashe, he never recovered. Banned from publishing, he died just a couple of years later, completely unknown. And, this pattern of punishing writers for what powerful people see as political dissent, it didn't end in the 16th century. It happened again in a strikingly similar way in 1950s Hollywood, where screenwriters like Dalton Trumbo were blacklisted for their political views, which effectively ended their public careers. It's a timeless dilemma, isn't it? When free expression is under threat, writers across centuries developed the same survival tactics. In the 1590s, the threat was prison. In the 1950s, it was losing your entire livelihood. And in both eras, some writers secretly paid fronts, other people, to put their names on the work, just so they could keep writing. The stakes were different, sure, prison versus poverty, but that impulse to silence people and the creative will to survive were exactly the same. Ultimately, the story of Jonson and Nashe isn't just about two writers who lived a long time ago. It's about a fundamental conflict that we are still grappling with today. When a society decides that words can be as dangerous as weapons, who gets to decide what can be said? Who draws that line? And who pays the price when that line is drawn?
All right, today we are diving into Ben Jonson's Epicœne. And let me tell you, this is a wild one. It's a 17th century comedy that's got it all. Deception, a truly desperate quest for silence, and what might be one of the most over-the-top pranks in all of theater history. So, let me ask you something. How far would you go for a little peace and quiet? I mean, really think about it. Would you move? Maybe soundproof your house? Well, for the guy at the center of this play, the answer is, so much further. So, let's meet our main character, Morose. This is a guy whose entire life, his whole existence, is a mission to find absolute, total silence. And his grand plan to get everything he wants, his fortune and his quiet, it's to find and marry a woman who literally never speaks. Yep, you heard that right.
Now, on the surface, that sounds like the perfect solution for a guy who hates noise, right? But what happens when that perfect, silent bride isn't quite what she seems? What if all that wonderful silence is just the bait? The bait in a really, really elaborate trap.
Okay, so to really get why this prank is so brilliant, you have to understand the target first. And our guy, Morose, is seriously one of the weirdest, most peculiar targets you'll find anywhere in literature. His whole problem, his defining feature, he hates noise. More than anything in the entire world.
And look, Morose sums it up perfectly himself with this line, "All discourses but my own afflict me." Just let that sink in for a second. It's not just loud noises that bother him, it's any sound that he doesn't make himself. We're not talking about a simple preference here. This is deep. It's almost like a disease.
And the lengths he goes to, they're just absolutely absurd. He picks a street to live on that's too narrow for noisy coaches. He's got a room with double walls and treble ceilings. His servants have to wear wool socks and talk to him through a tube. He even bribes musicians to stay away, and once fired a guy because his shoes were too creaky. This man is waging a full-on war against sound itself.
So you might be thinking, okay, the guy hates noise. What's the big deal? Well, here's why it matters. All of this, his intense hatred of sound, is about to crash head-on with some serious high-stakes family drama. We're talking about a fortune on the line. And when there's money involved, everyone wants a piece.
So let's meet our key players in this whole scheme. First up, of course, is Morose, our noise-hating target.
His goal? Find a silent wife and produce an heir. Then you've got his nephew, Sir Dauphin. He's the mastermind, and he's desperate to make sure he gets his inheritance. And rounding out the crew is Truitt, Dauphin's buddy. Let's just call him the agent of chaos. He's here to help his friend and cause as much delightful trouble as possible.
And here's the real kicker. Morose isn't just trying to find a quiet life for himself. No, this is an act of aggression. He is actively planning to disinherit his own nephew, Dauphin. See, he blames Dauphin and all his friends for every prank and loud noise that plagues him. So his solution? Get married, have a kid, and cut the nephew out of the will. Completely.
But you know, Dauphin isn't going to just sit back and let his inheritance disappear, right? Of course not. He cooks up this absolutely brilliant counterplot. And what's at the very heart of this plan? The one thing his uncle wants more than anything else in the world: a perfectly silent woman.
So here's how Dauphin's devious plan breaks down. Step 1, find an impossibly silent bride for his uncle. Step 2, introduce him to Epicœne, this woman who supposedly only speaks like 6 words a day. Step 3, convince Morose she's the one, the perfect quiet wife he's been dreaming of. Then, step 4 is crucial. Make sure that wedding happens, and fast. And then finally, step 5, spring the trap. Okay, so the plan is in motion, and things start moving incredibly fast. Dauphin sets up the meeting between his uncle and this perfect bride, and just like that, Morose is hooked, line and sinker.
And this interview scene, it is pure comic gold. Morose is there, asking his bride to be all these questions, and all he gets back are these tiny, soft whispers and little curtsies. And the crazy thing is, the less she says, the more he falls for her. He is just so desperate for silence that he is completely blind to any and all red flags.
And this quote right here, it just shows you how totally fooled he is. He calls her an admirable creature. He's gushing about her sweet simplicity. At this point, he is 100% convinced he's found the one single perfectly silent woman in all of London. And just like that, the wedding is on.
The vows are barely out of their mouths before, bam, Dauphin's trap is sprung. That whole carefully constructed world of silence that Morose has spent his entire life building, yeah, it's about to be shattered. And I mean shattered in the most spectacular, noisy way you can imagine.
And then, the transformation. 1 second, she's the meek, quiet bride of 6 words a day. The next, she's gone. And in her place is what Morose later calls a woman of Amazonian impudence. Basically, she's suddenly bold, she's loud, and she is not quiet. The second those vows were official, the whole act just dropped. And these are her first words spoken at full volume. Morose starts getting mad at the priest, and suddenly Epicœne just lets loose, loudly defending the guy. For Morose, hearing his new bride speak with that kind of force, that kind of authority, it's the ultimate betrayal. The nightmare has officially begun.
And after that, the floodgates just burst open. Dauphin has arranged for an entire party to just descend on the house. You've got these fashionable, chatty ladies, a knight who just will not stop talking, an entire uninvited wedding feast, musicians with fiddles, drinking games, and just to top it all off, drummers and trumpeters. Every possible source of noise you can think of crashes this party, turning Morbrose's silent sanctuary into an absolute chaotic nightmare.
And this quote, this desperate cry from Morose, it just says it all. Oh, the sea breaks in upon me. He literally feels like he's drowning in a tidal wave of noise and inundation with absolutely no escape. His perfect quiet plan has backfired and turned into his own personal hell. The prank, well, it's a resounding and very, very loud success.
So, where does it all end up? Well, Dauphin reveals the final, ultimate twist. Epicœne isn't a woman at all. It's a boy in disguise. This means the marriage is immediately annulled. Dauphin gets his inheritance, and Morose, well, he finally gets his silence back. But it leaves you wondering, right? What was all this really? Was it just an incredibly elaborate prank? Or was it a lesson that a bitter old man deserved to learn? Or was it all just cruel, pointless chaos? And that's the genius of Ben Jonson. As a master satirist, he just leaves that question hanging there for us to figure out.